Hi, I've covered this topic before about climate change and greenhouse gas emissions as created by humanity. And so I'm making another video because the issues come right to the fore now, with even school children all over the world getting involved, and very sadly misdirected totally onto the gnat of CO2 as a greenhouse gas emission, as opposed to ignoring the camel of methane emissions. And to get an understanding of the difference between regular CO2 and methane, CO2 as produced by fossil fuels, burning fossil fuels, for example, and methane. So the CO2 issue then is a baby's footprint, and the methane emissions is an elephant's footprint. So by focusing on the fossil fuel industry, we are literally ignoring the elephant in the room. And it is disturbing that people are being distracted like this. Now, we also need to understand that it is not just human activity that is contributing to climate change. We've also got very high levels of seismic activity at the moment. Volcanic activity has increased majorly in the last few decades, and we're also going through the magnetic pole reversal right now as well. And from the magnetic pole, from travelling just a few centimetres each year, it's now miles, tens of miles in a year. So we're looking at rapidly lessening of our magnosphere, because during magnetic pole reversal, what happens is that the Earth's magnosphere is weakened, some places being left with minimal, if any, protection, which means that more of the sun's energy is reaching right into our atmosphere, onto our planet, and especially with CMEs from the sun, mass coronal ejections, or coronal mass ejections as they're known as. So there's a number of factors to take into account here. Now, the fossil fuel industry does produce some methane, but by far the biggest methane producer is the livestock industry, the animal farming. And it's such a huge producer. If Americans could just cut back on animal foods by half, the effects on greenhouse gas emissions would be like garaging all US motor vehicles and vessels for as long as we keep our consumption down. But the way things are right now on our planet, we're going, literally, we are going to have to go vegan in order to dramatically reduce the amount of methane production, and as far as our contribution to it. Now, the point is, the baby footprint and elephant footprint analogy that I've just given, it by way of comparing CO2 impact to the impact of methane, is because a tonne of CO2, when compared with a tonne of methane, that tonne of methane, during the first year of its introduction into the Earth's atmosphere, is 100% more effective as a greenhouse gas than regular CO2. 100 times more warming impact than regular CO2. And then in the second year it goes down to about 70%, and it sticks around in the atmosphere for about 12 years altogether, but it does nonetheless, each year it reduces a little bit in its impact. So the percent goes down probably by the time the 12 years are up, to about 1% more than, say, regular CO2. But regular CO2 does hang around for a lot longer, unless we can find ways of absorbing it through, planting trees, for example. Now, this article focuses somewhat on methane, though it does again largely focus on the fossil fuel industry, because the meat and dairy industry is a mega industry producing major profits, and so nobody really wants to address that. But as far as the methane goes, according to Gary Hauser, who this report by Professor Peter Wadhams is sharing, Gary Hauser's commentary here, he says only immediate drastic action can avert a catastrophic worsening of our climate plight. Immediate drastic action. And, this is why when people over the years that come to me, if I've been out, going on about climate change and what have you, and I always ask them, well, what do you eat? Are you vegan? Some of them say, well, I'm vegetarian. Well, I'm sorry, it isn't enough. Are you vegan? No. Well, you do realise that what's on your dinner plate is having a far worse impact on climate change than somebody driving a car. And the point is that we need to address this issue from a managerial point of view with intelligence, and intelligence does include compassion. And it just so happens that living compassionately is good. It's good for our health, it's good for our frame of mind, it's good for our societies, because we are meant to live with compassion. Compassion is part of our conscience and our human consciousness. And as we've witnessed living for how long now in a world where compassion is considered a sign of weakness and lack of intelligence, even, in fact, the very opposite is true. We are being governed by stupid people precisely because they do not value compassion. They are not living according to any sense of conscience as levelled and measured against compassion, and we are putting ourselves at risk. So this article here, which is by Andy Verbicek, it's an excellent article. He suggests that the role of animal agriculture in climate change is vastly underestimated because of calculation parameters in this thought-provoking essay. So what he explains here is that the Livestock Long Shadow LS, the Food and Agricultural Organisation, FAO, posited that the livestock industry contributes 18% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, GHG emissions. Conversely, in Livestock and Climate Change, LCC, environmental assessment experts at the World Bank found the industry is actually responsible for a staggering 51% of global GHG emissions. By way of comparison, even 18% is more than the entire transportation sector's emissions. So even if we were only producing 18% methane from livestock farming, even that is more than the entire transportation sector's emissions. But he's asking which figure is more accurate. So he explains here that in fact, for committing the elementary error in environmental assessment, a portion of LS was forced to be retracted because they just failed to accurately assess this. And defences of the FAO's report, in light of the World Bank's 51% figure, have been shoddy and only furthered scepticism towards FAO estimates. So it's more likely to be 51%, and actually even that's very likely conservative, very conservative, because don't forget it's coming from the World Bank. So it's more likely to be about 70% of the methane emissions produced by humanity is directly related to the livestock industry, which is a horrifically cruel industry, and it was why I chose to become vegan 27 years ago, when I was just appalled at the horror of it all. And so, there's some very interesting points that are made in this essay, and one of those is beyond grossly undercounting livestock populations, further accounting for the wide discrepancy between the reports, the FAO did not count CO2 from animal respiration, whereas the World Bank did. Yet, according to Kyoto Protocol, livestock respiration should be counted, and there is good reason for it. Livestock, like automobiles, are a human invention and convenience, not part of pre-human times, and a molecule of CO2 exhaled by livestock is no more natural than one from an auto tailpipe. Today, tens of billions of more livestock are exhaling CO2 than in the pre-industrial period. So, you're talking about, as he explains it in this article, in order to maintain, the present human meat and dairy consuming human population, there is about 70 billion animals of cows, pigs, sheep that are sustaining us. 70 billion, you see. And they do have massively, a major impact, major impact. So, as he says, thus the 100-year timeframes are largely irrelevant for failing to reflect the urgency of the matter and the immediate need for significant reductions in potent GHGs like methane. Indeed, viewed under a 10-year timeframe, methane is seen as the world's leading driver of global warming, greater than even CO2. And the problem is that because we're producing this every year, and it's rising every year as the human population rises and as more countries are allegedly developing, it's increasing, and it is having an impact on global warming. And the way it's working is that modest warming over the coming decades could trigger runaway feedback loops, catastrophic tipping points leading to exponential warming. For instance, as temperatures rise and melt permafrost and methane clathrates, more methane is released, causing accelerated warming, which in turn causes more melting and methane release, which in turn causes further accelerated warming, and so on and so forth, which is why the 100-year timeframes are largely irrelevant. So there is an immediate need for significant reductions, an immediate need, and we do need to be operating within this 10-year time frame. We've got, I'd say, between 10 and 20 years window to address this, but to be marginally even on the safe side, we need to be looking at the next 10 years. And that does mean major investment from all these big corporations and bankers, trillionaires of the world, who've been profiting from their general crime and ignorance and stupidity and greed. Now it's payback time, because even their bunkers are not going to save them. Because if this happens, this runaway methane happens, there's going to be nothing for them to come out to from their bunkers. Absolutely nothing. They will literally, their bunkers will be tombs. As I've stated before, the only difference between those tombs and the tombs of the pharaohs in the past is that they will actually get to live in their tombs before they die in them, because there'll be nothing to come out to, because there's that much methane trapped. And once this global warming starts to melt the permafrost, and the amount of methane that's trapped in there is incredible, then will we ever escape? So I'm going to play you this little bit of an extract here, which is from these Russian scientists who've been studying the Siberian Arctic shelf and studying the permafrost melt. And this is from the Geophysical Union in Vienna that took place in 2012, and it was uploaded. It's been uploaded here by Nick Breeze, July 2013. So I'm just going to play this little bit of extract here.
So the methane in the atmosphere, the total amount of methane in the atmosphere, in the current atmosphere, it's about 5 gigatons. The amount of carbon preserved in form of methane in this subarctic shelf is approximately from hundreds to thousands of gigatons. And of course, it's only 1% of that amount is required to double the atmospheric burden of methane. But to destabilize 1% of this carbon pool, I think it's not much effort needed, considering that the state of permafrost and the amount of methane currently involved. Because what divides this methane from the atmosphere is a very shallow water column and a weakening permafrost, which is losing its ability to serve as a seal. And this is, I think it's not a matter of thousands of years, it's a matter of decades, I think. Maybe at most 100 years, but I think a matter of decades.
I believe it would happen anytime.
It might potentially happen because just because this area is very seismically and tectonically active, and there was some investigation that the tectonic activity is increasing, and the seismic activity is, what is seismic activity? It's destabilization of this grounds. It's just mechanical forcing destabilization. So it's additional pathways for this methane to be escaped. And many factors, I would list you many factors that that are very convenient and convincing for us, so that might happen. Not any time. I think any time sounds like it might happen today. It might happen tomorrow, the day after tomorrow.
Might.
You think so?
I'm in person. No, but
Igor is a very convinced person because he spent a lot of time over there. And if, for example, a few years ago we could reach the certain sites from the fast ice. Fast ice is annual ice, and we can reach quite easily to certain sites, hundreds or tens of kilometers from the coast. But last 2 years we couldn't do that because the ice was broken. It was polynias, it was brines, it was leads. So that means that, and where the sea ice should be about 2 meters thick, it was 40 centimeters thick. That means that the processes, all the processes that serve destabilization of everything, of the sea ice, of the water column, of the currents increasing, I mean the movement of water beneath the sea ice increased. So everything looks anomalous, even from our experience from these 10 years Everything looks anomalous, and this is what makes him thinking that making him think that the worst thing might happen.
No, we cannot exclude this. Maybe it's 1%, maybe it's less, but we cannot exclude because.
Shortly speaking, we do not like what we see there. Absolutely do not like.
So she absolutely does not like the Russian scientists, and you could hear Igor there, one of her colleagues, saying, no, this could happen any time. So, you know, we are facing a catastrophic release of methane, because our current atmosphere, with all our animal industry and everything, is 5 gigatons. And then we've got here hundreds to thousands of gigatons of methane. Gigatons. So, how are we going to deal with this? Well, first of all, we can all make our own contribution of choosing what we eat, changing our diets. Everybody can do that overnight. That's not something you need to go campaigning about, is it? I mean, I've lived as a vegan for 27 years. I mean, it's got better in the last few years, but it was like living in a desert, really, being vegan. But there's more and more vegan foods available now, a variety of foods. I'll leave some links below, leave Vegan Society links. Check it out. Change your diet. And also, with that change of diet will come with it a change of consciousness, a heightened awareness, and hopefully this will filter up to the mega rich bankers and corporations. And as I say, it's payback time. You're going to have to dig your hands into your pockets, trillionaires and billionaires, because people currently now surviving on livestock, surviving on fossil fuels, you know, we can't just dump them. You're going to need to invest in them so that they can transfer from one industry to the other industry. So the people presently involved in oil production and what have you can transfer into another equally but more eco-friendly industry. You see, we need to do this humanely. It needs to be humane on every level. And it's going to take a lot more than us stop eating meat and dairy as well now to address the damage that has already been caused. So we are going to need to invest in the kind of technology that is going to prevent this major release of methane from the Siberian Arctic shelf. I mean, it appears that we have the capability to produce the kind of technology that has given us 3 nuclear melt-throughs at Fukushima and is presently destroying the Pacific Ocean, which is another thing that these trillionaires and billionaires need to address now, because they're the ones that have been making all the profits off it. They're the ones that have been relying on those reactors to produce the material to make their depleted uranium weapons and their nuclear bombs. Because let's face it, humanity does not really need nuclear power to run our fridge and boil our kettles, do we? So we need to be holding these big organisations, big corporations now to account. And we need to insist. So rather than us all getting into the streets, which, as I say, hats off to them, respect, but it's going to take a lot more than getting in the streets, holding your placards against fossil fuels. We are going to need to hold the placards up demanding that these bankers and these big corporatists now start investing in saving our planet. And they're going to have to do it, because what use will their money be when they're sitting in their bunkers and suddenly realising that, look, sorry guys, you're not going to be getting out of here anytime soon. Okay? This is far worse than nuclear war. And don't forget, if there was a major catastrophe on our planet with all these nuclear power stations that are running at the moment, then what's going to happen to them? You're looking at how many nuclear melt-throughs will be going on. I mean, we are talking, we have set this situation up that one big, even a natural catastrophe, could actually destroy everything, virtually all the life on our planet. That it might never ever have chance to recover, because methane is not a gas that life itself can thrive with. So that's why I have made this video today, is to reiterate these facts, to share the solutions, to share the information, to raise awareness, and in the hope that together we can find a humane, sane, arrive at a level of sanity enough to save our planet and assure a future for future generations, and hopefully a kinder, more humane, compassionate, caring kind of future than we're presently providing. So, you know, tens of billions of livestock raised to live hellish lives, and what for? Because people want to eat meat, when we know now without a doubt that actually a vegan diet is one of the most healthiest diets. And as I say, people told me when I became vegan 27 years ago that I would die. Well, I'm still here, and I'm actually, as somebody who suffers anyway with chronic complex PTSD, I would have been a lot less healthy than I am were I not vegan, and I know that for a fact. And it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me that actually being vegan turns out that it is contributing to protecting our planet. And as I say, as I've said, if you really care, if you really care about climate change, all these millions of people across the planet who've been going out on their marches with their placards about CO2, forget the CO2, okay? Forget that. Focus on the methane. Forget the gnat. Focus on the camel. I think once we address that camel, once we are prepared to make a change ourselves, each of us individually, then we will be more effective even at reducing the amount of fossil fuels that we're currently using. And I do believe we need to drastically reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, because, alright, they might not be having the major effect on climate change as people have been indoctrinated into believing right now, but nonetheless, those emissions are bad for our health, for human health and our environment. So it makes sense to be reducing our fossil fuels, but please let us focus on the real problem here now, on the most important problem that needs immediate and drastic action, as is explained by these Russian scientists, as is explained here. Immediate drastic action. Only immediate drastic action can avert a catastrophic worsening of our climate plight. So please, please take part in immediate drastic action. Change your diet. Change your diet, people. Please.